Questions to the Prime Minister. Question number 1, Mr. Timothy Wood.
Mr. Speaker, sir. I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today. This evening I hope to have my regular audience of Her Majesty the Queen.
Mr. Tim Wood.
I thank my right honourable friend for that reply. Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the reaffirmation of NATO at yesterday's meeting of heads of government in Brussels, and also the renewal of the United States commitment to the keeping of American troops and nuclear weapons in Europe?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we had an excellent summit in Brussels yesterday, all of us reaffirming the importance of NATO for the stability and security it has brought, and also welcoming the reassurance of the President of the United States. He would station significant armed forces and nuclear weapons in Europe as long as his allies wished it. And we also felt that the negotiations on conventional weapons take place through the NATO Pact and the Warsaw Pact, and that therefore both must continue. Altogether, a very successful summit, and the President gave us an excellent account of his talks with Mr. Gorbachev, and we welcome the changes that are taking place in Eastern Europe.
Mr. Neil Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree with President Bush's view that changes in Eastern Europe absolutely mandate new thinking on East-West relations and on the European community? Could you tell us what new changes is she now making in her thinking?
At the summit yesterday, as I indicated, it was important to keep NATO going. Its security and the concept of NATO have been a winning concept and have been the reason why we are now seeing some of the changes in Eastern Europe that we are witnessing. It has not been being weak with the Soviet Union that has brought about the changes, but being strong with them, that we are now seeing some of the moves to freedom.
Mr. Kinnock.
Speaker, I think it'll be apparent there was neither newness or much thinking in that answer. Mr. Speaker, isn't it obvious that the Prime Minister has great difficulty in coping with the great changes that are taking place in our continent? Isn't that the reason, Mr. Speaker, as many in her own party agree, that she is being increasingly pushed towards the margin in both the alliance and the community? What good does that do to our country?
Nonsense, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman was never very much in favour of NATO because he could not in fact underwrite its nuclear deterrent, which is an essential force. With regard to Europe and closer Europe integration, that causes us no problems. It was we who proposed the single market completion by 1992, and it was also we who have implemented most of the directives. With regard to President Bush and his views on the European market, the Right Honourable Gentleman will be interested to know that he telephoned me shortly before I came into the House to say that his views on European integration had not changed in any way, and that there was no change in his position, which is one of full support for completion of the single market in 1992 and for an open and liberal Europe. That is what we stand for, but not what the Right Honourable Gentleman says.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. Mr. Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, doesn't that provide us with an interesting insight into the Prime Minister's present thinking? She has to get a reassuring phone call from the President before she can say anything.
Absolute nonsense. If the Right Honourable Gentleman is reduced to making that accusation, the fact is that he has been totally isolated on NATO for years and also isolated in many ways on the European Economic Community. We are up to date. In fact, our actions have been responsible in many ways for the very good changes we have seen.
Sir Bernard Brain.
My right honourable friend today give consideration to the fact that of all the peoples in Eastern and Central Europe now moving towards freedom, the Poles are experiencing acute shortages of basic foodstuffs and medicines, and that people will die unnecessarily this winter unless urgent relief is sent. which since the Roman Catholic Church, thank God, in Poland, has the necessary means of distribution, would she order an airlift straight away?
Speaker, as my right honourable friend knows, this matter was raised both at the Economic Summit and also at the Paris Summit, which we had recently. We have, during this last part of the current year, provided some £60 million to purchase food and send to Poland. We are assured that the supplies are getting through. There also will be more committed for next year. I have also been in touch with some of the voluntary organizations, in particular with Lady Ryder of Warsaw, who has told me about that they're quite ready to let their lorries roll and take more food into Poland, and I shall be keeping in touch to see if that is necessary. But there's no shortage of money to provide the food.
Ashton.
Speaker, despite the Prime Minister's words, is it not the case that she will end up totally isolated at the forthcoming summit in Strasbourg? What will Mrs. What will the Prime Minister do these last remaining days before Strasbourg? Will the Prime Minister do to end that isolation? Or is she determined to remain in the past and condemn this country to a future without friends, without influence, and without a role in Europe in the future?
What nonsense. The honourable gentleman comes out with that question almost every time like a cracked gramophone record. He is isolated if he thinks that this House would accept stage 2 or stage 3 of the Delors report. It indicated quite clearly that it would not. I hope he would support us on 1992, on the measures necessary to complete the single market, and also I would hope, but haven't very much faith, that he would support us on a liberal open market economy.
Sir George Gardner.
Say, will my right honourable friend act to dispel any baseless suggestions that she is some kind of narrow little nationalist? And will she also emphasise that she has always advocated a sharing of responsibility and of sovereignty where that is the clear economic advantage of all members of the European community?
Mr. Speaker, I think this country has probably done as much as any other country in the European community over the years for the freedom of Europe, for our staunchness as allies in NATO, and to move forward the common market. Yes, we continue to act as a sovereign country, everything coming before this House, and we believe that the future of Europe is best through sovereign countries cooperating together, and rather that than by trying to force it into a mould which would not fit all the countries of Europe.
Alice Mann.
Refer the Honourable Lady to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Alice Mann.
Given this might be the last time the Prime Minister answers questions at the display, would she tell us her proudest achievements? Is it the number of homeless? Is it the deeply unpopular poll tax? Or is it the image of a government that resorts to seedy bribes in order to put its privatisation programme?
Well, I shall hope to see the Honourable Lady in her place on Thursday as usual, she in her position and I in mine, and I think there will not be any great trouble. The proudest achievement, bringing Britain from the decline of socialism to the prosperity of conservatism, spending almost half as much again in real terms on all the social security services, being a staunch ally and known to be a staunch ally the world over, and restoring the respect for Britain overseas.
Mr. Bowden, before.
I refer my honourable friend to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
In making an assessment of the most direct and cost-effective channel-tunnel rail link for the whole of the United Kingdom with continental Europe for both passengers and freight, will my right honourable friend give full consideration to the advantages of Stratford over King's Cross as a London interchange?
I think, Mr. Speaker, that will be a matter for the chairman of the committee, which will consider petitions against the bill, and it will be for British Rail and its joint venture partner Eurail to persuade the committee that they have made the correct choice of route and terminal.
Sidney Bidwell.
The Right Honourable Lady consider dismissing the Secretary of State for the Health Department for his gross incompetence in failing to solve the ambulance workers' dispute and his ill treatment of very decent people.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member is aware, other workers in the health service accepted similar offers to those which have been turned down by the ambulance services way back in April or May. Since then, the ambulance workers have been offered more on an 18-month basis. I very much regret that the ambulance service are out. I'm afraid it is the sick and ill who suffer. I'm glad that they are in quite a number of places where they're providing accident and emergency services. Where they are not able to do so, the police and army are fulfilling their duties.
Mr. William Hague, number 5.
Friend's reply, which I gave some moments ago.
Hague.
My right honourable friend agree that the main pressure for the European Social Charter comes from trade unions and their political backers in some member states, mainly because they fear that the single market is a threat to their long-established restrictive practices and their very cosy corporatism.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I agree. There are some countries who have high costs in the community who want to saddle the rest of the community with high costs so that those who wish to invest in the community do not go to the lower-cost countries, and those high-cost countries call it social dumping to go to the low-cost countries. It hardly seems to me very communitaire. My honourable friend will have seen a report which quantifies the employment prospects in this country if we went in for the social charter as it is present drafted. It could mean, if the minimum wages were half male average earnings, some 500,000 unemployed within 3 years, or if there were 2/3 average male and female earning.
Order!
2/3 average male and female earning, some 1.5 million unemployed within 3 years.
The Daffy Wigley!
In view of the impending renewed tragedy in Ethiopia, will the Prime Minister give an assurance that this Christmas that rich Britain will not be impervious to the plight of these people, but will give a full and generous and urgent response?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether my honourable friend heard the statements made by the Minister of Overseas Development, who announced a further £2 million of emergency aid on the 27th of November, bringing the total commitments of food and emergency aid to nearly £13 million so far this year. And we are in regular touch with the British voluntary organisations. He will know that one of the problems is to distribute the food, to see that it gets to those in need. But in addition to other things, he will know of the civil war going on in Eritrea and Tigray.
Mr. Michael Knowles, number 7.
Refer my honourable friend's reply that I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Knowles.
Would my right honourable friend... It's no good the opposition being envious of Tory intellectual...
Order! Mr. Knowles.
Would my right honourable friend not agree that the sale of Rover to British Aerospace not only ensured that the company remained British, but it also ensured its long-term viable future?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. British Leyland Rover was a constant drain on the British taxpayer to the tune of £3 billion. And at one stage in 1988, its overdraft, which the government had to guarantee, was of the order of £1.6 billion. It showed but little sign of going down. It is very good to have got both British Leyland and Rover into the private sector, to have removed the burden on the taxpayer, to have kept the confidence in British Rover and its distributors, and also good prospects for the future of its employees.
Statement, Mr. Secretary King.